Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you'll are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would do a fight prediction. The fight that is going to be happening, I believe, this Saturday in boxing. Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. Pretty decent fight. I'm actually decently excited to see this fight, which I can't often say for a Demetrius Andrade fight because I don't really usually think that he fights the most elite levels of competition. But when it comes down to it, let's talk about this fight, man. So, Demetrius Andrade, just to talk about him real quick, I've been hearing a lot about Demetrius Andrade for the past I don't know how many years, from all the new media and LDBC channels, especially. I heard from a very very certain amount of channels for a very long time that at one point in time he was the best 154 pounder, and now I always hear that he's the best 160 pounder, and he's the biggest boogeyman in the world, and all this sort of stuff. I've even heard from certain people that he's the most talented 160 pounder. It really depends on who is there. Do I see him as the most talented 160 pounder? Well, I mean, maybe he is now that Golovkin is a little bit downhill, and Canelo Alvarez is no longer in that division. But to be honest with you, Demetrius Andrade, in terms of talent, he's kind of right there with Charlo and Billy Joe Saunders. I kind of put all those fighters on the same level, but to be honest with you, I don't even know if he's on the same level as the Billy Joe Saunders or Jamal Charlo. Now, he could beat those fighters just because, he's decently lengthy, he's tall, not much taller than those guys. But when it comes down to, he is decently talented, but I could easily see him losing to those fighters as well. But the bottom line is this: the majority of the time when it comes to a Demetrius Andrade fight, I don't think that sometimes you can even count the fights that he has as even B class fighters. And a certain amount of people would debate that, but I think Demetrius Andrade really, I know some of the opponents that he's fought, but the one opponent that I think would be somewhat highly regarded that he's fought in his career is Vanes Martirosyan. That is the only fighter that I can recall that would be decently regarded that he's fought in his career. In this fight against Liam Williams, I can't call this an A-class fight because I can't call Liam Williams an A-class fighter because he doesn't have the credentials for that. But what I will say is this. When I looked at the record today, and I said, okay, well, let's look and see who Demetrius Andrade is facing next. And I seen the name Liam Williams. I was like, oh, well, another one of these, up-and-coming British guys, comes down to it. As soon as he faces high league competition, loses one of the fights. That's basically what I saw. I looked at his record, saw he had 2 losses against Liam Smith. First fight gets stopped. Apparently it was because of a cut. Didn't see the first fight, so y'all let me know on that one. Second fight, I did just recently watch because I decided to do a little bit of research on Liam Williams. And I gotta tell you, I actually was decently impressed with Liam Williams. I think that he's actually a decent fighter. I think, to be honest with you, when I look at Liam Smith and I look at Liam Williams, I think Liam Smith and Liam Williams, I think the second fight, to be honest with you, I think it was a fight that could have went either way. If you scored it for Liam Smith, I had no problem. If you scored it for Liam Williams, I have no problem. So it was a very tough fight for me to score. But when it comes down to it, I think Liam Williams slowed down a little bit too much in the middle half of the fight. I think he gave up a little bit too many rounds in the second half. And on top of that, Liam Smith was going to be favored going into the second one, probably because he won the first one. At least from what I recall, he certainly seemed to be the favorite by what the announcers were getting at. So I think they were rooting on for him a little bit. And those scorecards were absolutely ridiculous. I think I heard like 117 to 111 or something like that. Like, what is that? Like 9 rounds to 3? That's ridiculous. That was not a 9 rounds to 3 fight. That was absolutely an atrocious scorecard. But when it comes down to it, bottom line is this. When I took a look at that fight, I said, well, he seems to be vulnerable to the 1-2. He, sometimes he can't necessarily avoid a jab very decently well. He seems like a talented fighter, but, he doesn't necessarily seem to always put it together all the time, and sometimes when it comes to him avoiding a 1-2 or sometimes avoiding a jab, I don't think that he avoids it necessarily the best. Sometimes he is a little bit too straightforward. I'm not saying that he has bad head movement because I don't think he does. Liam Smith, actually, when it comes down to it, and this is going to be weird to say, Liam Smith, I actually think, has less ability than Liam Williams does. And a certain amount of people may disagree with that. But when I watched the fight, I thought Liam Williams actually had better boxing ability. And let me tell you something that actually surprised me about Liam Williams. I'm surprised at the athlete that he is. He was very fast when I just recently watched him. He does not have bad power. He's on a 7-fight winning streak right now, and he's knocked out every single one of those opponents, in those fights. I believe that from what I keep hearing, he's also changed corners. changed coaches. So but I just recently watched the fight, and I have the fight up on the screen right now. What is this one called? It's called Liam Williams versus Mark Heffron, Irish fighter, I believe. He looked decently improved in this fight. I think his defense looked a little bit more improved. The speed looked to be still there. The power even looks possibly improved. He looks better than he did before. And to be honest with you, I think if Liam Williams and if Liam Smith were to have a third match, I think there's a potential that Liam Williams possibly could beat him in a third match, although I don't know if that fight would happen. But we'll just have to see what happens on that. Liam Williams, to be honest with you, I think that Liam Williams might have more of a chance to defeat Demetrius Andrade than if Liam Smith were going to face him next. Because when I take a look at Liam Williams, I am somewhat impressed by what I see. Now, once again, I can't call him an A-class fighter because I don't think he has those types of credentials. But I am somewhat impressed with what I see. Once again, I think he's a decent athlete. He's not the worst boxer in the world. I think his defense has improved. He seems to be overall improved as a fighter. And the things about Demetrius Andrade, and I've always said this about Demetrius Andrade, I've been told for a certain amount of years that this dude is the best 154-pounder, best 160-pounder, most talented fighter, in those divisions. I've always been told this. I don't think Demetrius Andrade is more talented than a prime Golovkin. I don't think he's more talented than a prime Canelo. I don't think he's more talented than a prime Erislandy Lara. I don't think he's more talented than a prime Jamal Charlo. I don't think he's more talented than a prime Billy Joe Saunders. To be honest with you, I don't think he's more talented than any of those fighters. And a certain amount of people would heavily disagree, especially the LDBC and new media. But just take a look at his last fight against that one dude. I can't remember the guy's name. Demetrius Andrade sometimes does have a habit of swinging wildly and overextending his punches. And sometimes, being a little bit slow on his feet. Not to a great degree, but sometimes can be a little bit flat-footed for my taste. But when it comes down to Demetrius Andrade, he does kind of have somewhat of a slick style. He reminds you a little bit of Erislandy Lara. He reminds you, some people, I guess, a little bit of Floyd Mayweather. But in my opinion, he's not on their level. He's not as slick. He's not as good as a prime Erislandy Lara. He's not as good as a Floyd Mayweather Jr. So all the LDBC and new media fans, they love to say, well, Canelo, he won't fight Demetrius Andrade. And I do think that fight should eventually happen. But Demetrius Andrade, in my opinion, he's not necessarily on the level of some of these other fighters that they try to put him on. It is what it is. Listen, man, bottom line is this. I think that this is actually a decent fight. I have to pick Andrade in this fight. I think I am going to go with Andrade for the win. I believe that Andrade most likely is going to get to him. Because even though I have seen him improve a little bit, I still do think he seems to be a little bit vulnerable to the jab. And Andrade, he's just, the reach I don't think actually is going to be that big of a difference. But it's just the fact that he is decently tall. And when it comes down to it, he has decent power. Andrade doesn't necessarily have A-grade power, but he has enough power to knock you on your ass, possibly if he hits you right. And it's not impossible to hurt Liam Williams, so we'll see what happens, at least from what I've seen of him. That's just from what I've seen of him with my little bit of research that I've done. But when it comes down to it, what I will say is this. If an upset were to happen here, I would not be shell-shocked. It would not make my jaw drop to the floor. That's what I'm saying here. There are certain upsets that happen where your jaw will completely drop to the floor that you never expected to happen in a million years. If an upset were to happen here, or if this were to be a split decision or a majority decision, I would not be overly surprised. Hopefully Liam Williams can last for the whole entire fight. Hopefully he can, keep the hand speed going. Hopefully he's in very good conditioning. Hopefully he doesn't slow down a little bit in the middle rounds like I've seen him do in those Liam Smith fights, at least in the second one that I watched. When it comes down to it, hopefully we get the best version of Liam Williams here, because there is a potential that we could have a new WBO middleweight champion. And I did not think I was going to say that at all before I watched highlights and before I watched a couple of fights of this guy. But let me tell you what, this guy actually is a very decent fighter. I would say that this guy has at least a B-class skill set. Some people would even say an A-class skill set. I don't know if I can quite put him on the A-class skill set level because he just hasn't beat any great fighters that I've seen. But when it comes down to it, this guy is more skilled than what a lot of people think. I think a lot of people are going in here not knowing who this guy is. I think they're saying Demetrius Andrade, he's just going to knock his ass out early. Let me tell you what, I think that this fight is at least going to go into 8-9 rounds. I think if Demetrius Andrade does stop him, it's going to be somewhere around the 8th or 9th round. But I would also not be surprised if this goes to unanimous decision. Bottom line is this. I am going to pick Demetrius Andrade to win this fight. But kind of like unlike his other opponents of his past couple fights, at least from what I've seen, where they didn't win many rounds, from what I've seen, or the parts of the fights that I did watch, Liam Williams has a real chance to win some rounds here. He has a real chance to make this a very tough fight. The last real tough fight that I've seen Demetrius Andrade in, from what I remember, from what I watched, so if someone else has a different experience, let me know, but the last real fight that I seen Demetrius Andrade actually in a tough fight was the Jack Kolke fight, a German fighter, I believe. And I remember, all the fans of Demetrius Andrade, they're saying, oh, he should have clearly won that fight. It shouldn't have been a split decision. No, let me tell you this. I watched that fight. That was a very tough fight from what I remember. Now, I only watched that fight once. I only watched it once. But I remember that being a decently tough fight. So we'll see what happens here. Now, I do believe Demetrius Andrade has improved just a little bit, but I see some of the same faults that I seen there from still many years ago. Sometimes he swings a little bit too wildly. Sometimes he overextends his punches. Sometimes he does have holes in his game defensively. Liam Williams is a decently fast fighter. He's not a bad athlete. He does not have bad power. He can hurt you. It is also not impossible to hurt Andrade or possibly knock him down. I've seen Vanes Martirosyan do it. Now, who knows? Maybe Liam Williams doesn't even have the power that Vanes Martirosyan does. I don't know. But if he hits Andrade a couple of times, if he hits him with a good punch, possibly could hurt him, could at least knock him down, could get some points on the scorecards. We'll just have to see what happens. Bottom line is this. I am gonna have to go with Demetrius Andrade to win this fight. I do think overall he is the more talented fighter. I do think overall that obviously he is the better fighter. And I think that he is a tier above a Liam Williams, most likely. But when it comes down to it, if Liam Williams somehow were to pull this off, it wouldn't be the most surprising thing that I've seen. And a lot of people are going to think that I'm crazy for saying that. But that's just my opinion on the situation. I'm going to say that, and this still seems far apart with all of what I've said, I am going to favor Demetrius Andrade 80-20%. But let me tell you what. Before I knew about Liam Williams' ability, I probably would have gave Liam Williams about a 5% chance to win this fight. That went all the way up to 20, maybe even 30%. I still think Demetrius Andrade is the clear favorite in this fight. I have to favor him because he has the experience against, more fighters on top of that, and, pretty much the same level of competition that, if not a little bit better than what Liam Williams is used to facing, I believe. And on top of that, I just don't know if Liam Williams has it in him to win a fight like this. But we'll see what happens. I think it's a very interesting fight. I think it's actually a decent matchup. Is it as decent of a matchup, of course, as the Billy Joe Saunders or Jamal Charlo or something like that maybe Demetrius Andrade could get? No, of course not. But this is a decent fight. And if an upset were to happen here, would not be the most surprising thing I've seen. So that's pretty much all I have to say on the matter. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know who you think is going to win this fight. I see a certain amount of people actually predicting Liam Williams to win that fight. I think that's a bit risky, maybe a little bit of wishful thinking, but hey, you don't know. Actually, I do think Liam Williams is a little bit of a bad matchup for Demetrius Andrade. I expect Demetrius Andrade to lose some rounds in this fight. I expect him to have some trouble in this fight. I truly, truly do. So we'll see what happens. But that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think on this fight. My prediction is Demetrius Andrade either by latter round stoppage or by unanimous decision most likely. So we'll see what happens. But that's my prediction on this. I do believe that Demetrius Andrade will outwork him. I do believe overall that he's going to be able to counter him. We'll see what happens. But anyway, that's really my prediction. Thank you guys so much for watching. And tune in to the fight Saturday.